Hello, dear chess lovers. Welcome to another podcast episode. This time I'm hosting FIDE Master Dalton Perrine from the States. Dalton, guys, is a FIDE Master. He's a Chessable author with 5 published courses. He has a blog on chess called Chess Chatter blog. He's also a podcast host, Chess Chatter podcast. He has a YouTube channel. He's earning his life from chess. He's a very thoughtful author. He was a student of Grandmaster Sam Shankland. He was endorsed by GM Shankland. He has a great work ethic, his courses are great, and he's a good guy in general to talk in this podcast series because I think it's very relevant for my subscribers as well. There's so many things I want to discuss with you, Dalton, today. I mean, you also wrote a course on Chessable about Blunder Check process or survive and thrive, how to blunder less and defend better. And now a competitor is coming. I'm working on a Blunder Check course, my friend. So we have to discuss exactly how you formulated that course and let's say what could be the good practices in terms of checklist questions and so on to reduce the blunders. I also want to get better and improve the course after talking to you. That's also one reason why I invited you today. But also you're working another course on strategic blueprints of converting advantageous position, right? You will also tell us a bit about that, maybe give us like a sneak peek of certain positions. And before we dive in, Dalton, I mean, your chess history briefly, like, can you tell us a bit about that? Is just give us a bit of information about yourself for my audience who might not know you so much.
Sure. So I started playing chess when I was 10 years old, 31 years old now, so about 21 years ago. And pretty much the way it started off was that I found a chessboard kind of in the corner of a classroom with a friend back in 5th grade. We both knew how the pieces moved because our dads had taught us in the past, and we just started playing. I found out you could play online back then, back in the old internet chess club days.
I see.
And my parents figured, well, this is a pretty healthy hobby to have. It wasn't,
Yeah.
Let's say like normal video games probably they were worried about at that point. So
Yeah.
they were the ones who found the local club. They brought me there, started playing in tournaments, started, taking it more seriously as a hobby. I've been playing ever since then. Hit master level around the age of 18, so about 8 years later,
Yeah.
and started getting into kind of full-time chess about 10 years ago, as you said. So I
Right.
started coaching back then. I did a little bit of YouTube at the start, kind of veered off of that path a little bit. But yeah, in the past 4 years or so, I've made Chessable courses, restarted the YouTube channel. I've done group lessons for about the 10 years as well over that time,
Wow.
and also started a Substack blog, a little bit of a podcast, a little bit of everything. So
Yes.
trying to kind of find my way through the chess ecosystem.
Yeah. And I'll also talk about group lessons a little bit because I'm also giving group lessons. Recently, I talked to many people about the advantages and potential drawbacks of group lessons versus individual lessons as well. So I also would love to ask you some questions about that. Let's start with the first one then, because Survive and Thrive is your, let's say, the most popular Chessable course. And that's was also your first one that was endorsed by Sam Shankland, I believe, right? So that was the course
Yep.
that is quite popular. It's probably because of the blunder check process being such a difficult and important part of this cruel game. You know, a single blunder can nullify all the other advantages you built up. And it was not easy also. There's a clear, empty space in this niche, at least for Chessable. Yeah, there are not so many courses about that particular aspect of blunder check. But if I'm not wrong, you also included seeing the threat positions in the course and not only this final blunder check, right? Because to me, they're sort of different processes. Can you tell us a bit about that, the content of that course, actually?
Yeah, so the course has, I believe, it's kind of 5 main chapters. There's a warm-up chapter and then like a very challenging or more advanced chapter at the end. But kind of the 5 main chapters in the middle incorporate, I think the first one is when you're already in check, how do you react to the check or how do you deal with the check in the first place? So
Mhm.
you'll have one move with your king or one way of dealing with the check that is safe to play. The other ones are all going to be bad for whatever
Mhm.
reason. The second chapter is the what's the threat chapter. So kind of like you were just saying, like identifying what the threat is in the first place, and then there's going to be one best move in the position to react to the threat, whether it's a defensive reaction or a counter-attacking move or whatever it might be in the
Mhm.
position. Um, Then there's a third and fourth chapter, which are, I think I labeled them as the process of elimination, and then and then I think it was candidate moves evaluation. Pretty much they're kind of like multiple choice chapters where you'll have two
Mhm.
different choices to decide between, or three different choices to decide between, and you have to kind of use the process of elimination to figure out which is the safest of those move options. And then then there's the final chapter, which is on a blunder check. I present you with a certain move to consider. It may be the best move in the position. It may not be the best move in the position. It is up to you to figure out if it is the best move, you should play it. If it's not the best move, you want to find something. You want to find what is the optimal move in the position instead. But
Right.
ultimately, it's all about kind of hitting your thinking process from different angles. Because
Mhm.
when you are playing a game yourself and your opponent's just made a move, the way that I tend to think of things is you want to first start off by thinking about what they were trying to do, what their ideas behind the move are. If they do make a serious threat or do something that you really need to react to, then you want to identify that so you don't get yourself in trouble.
Yeah.
And then kind of, even if they didn't make a threat, maybe you do have a couple of moves of your own that you're thinking about in the position, and you have to kind of again use this process of elimination to figure out which one you're going to go for. And
Mhm.
then whatever move you do end up deciding on, you still want to do the blunder check anyways to make sure that you're not about to shoot yourself in the foot, blunder a
Yeah.
piece, lose material, or something like that. So it's kind of hitting the way you would think during a game from a couple of different angles, and I think that's a
Yeah.
good way of practicing things.
Was it only tactical puzzles or also positional puzzles when it comes to seeing the threat, for example? We were seeing tactical threats, right? Direct threats in that first chapter.
Yeah, I tended to focus on tactical threats, not only
Hmm.
for myself because, let's say, putting together those types of positions felt a little bit easier, I'll just say.
Yeah.
Uh, but also, yeah, it was more of a tactic course than a strategic course.
Right.
If I was to make like a part two or something, I might incorporate more positional or strategic threats that the opponent might be trying to make. But this particular course was all on the tactical side of things.
Right. Because I created one course about this, only about seeing the threats, right? My opponent's last move, identifying threats, mistakes, and misconceptions. And that's actually a mix of tactical and positional puzzles. You need to figure out, just like in a real game, what the threat is. Can be positional, can be tactical. Half of the course is about punishing the opponent's blunder. You're seeing the drawback of their last move. That's also, I think, one crucial part of the checklist. We will talk about some checklists later on. But you touched on a couple of interesting points that almost you talked about this three-leg cycle of thinking. Yeah, whenever your opponent makes a move, the first question becomes, what would they do if I don't make a move right now? Right? Yeah, you see the threat as a result, and then you generate some candidate moves for yourself, given what the position demands. And then before you play that move, you make this separate blunder check process, right? Because a great strategic move can be a blunder, and that's why we always have to do this proof check process in the end, the blunder check process. What if the opponent defeats us? And here comes my question, because, well, do you actually go through some sort of checklist questions in a way that can guide them to what to look at for blunder checks? Or, for example, we were telling them, look for every check captured threat, which we can now discuss, the usefulness of check captured threat algorithm. But at first, I want to ask you this question, like, how did you guide them of what to look at for blunder check, basically?
Yeah, so my course is probably more catered to, let's say, like intermediate plus players. It's more of
Yeah.
it's been described a little bit more as like a workbook. So essentially, it's all these positions. There is a little bit of instruction with each puzzle. Obviously, like I explain the answers and what to think about in each position, but
Yeah.
for the most part, it's more of a exercise book rather than like
Uh-huh.
a theoretical, let me explain to you how to think through
Right.
positions type of thing. There is a little bit of that at the introduction for each chapter.
Mhm.
But for the most part, the way that I structured it was more on the like, here's a bunch of different puzzles that will get you to think through these things. But
Yeah.
if you're looking for, let's say, like a more in-depth explanation as to how, like maybe you've talked about with I think like Dan Block, for instance, like certain specific questions that you want to ask
Right.
yourself in positions. It's not as much catered to that side of things. Uh, I have thought over the years of like maybe I should have made like a prequel version of the course that would have been a
Yeah.
little bit more of like an introduction to some of these concepts, but um, other people, as you said, also kind of have filled the niche a little bit more. You're doing it yourself here with your new course, and
Yeah.
I kind of felt like some other people would fill in the gaps with that
Yeah.
part of things.
So
But
it's good because there's no overlap. So I can complement what you already did on Chessable. Yeah. So that's also somehow good to know because obviously I'm also working with beginners, upcoming players. They need more guidance. I mean, that's one thing that keeps them, yeah, getting those ratings because that's really a cruel game. I mean, they need to really minimize those kind of errors, and they need more specific guidance. At least that's what I'm thinking so far. At least for beginners, they need more, even in terms of checklists, because nothing is automatized yet for these people. So they need more like supports. And that's why I will now talk about those important things when it comes to what exactly to look for. And they're not check capture threats. Yes, there is check, but then comes, loose pieces, alignments, forks, and trappable pieces. So, and of course, they will just cater to individual. If you already can see trappable pieces, if it's automatized for you, then you don't need to have that in your checklist. You can talk about other things. You can get the other guys in your checklist. And the advantage is that, well, you're much more specific, basically, because threat is a very vague term. Check capture threat. What is a threat? Threat can be billions of different things. And obviously, intermediate players are maybe easier. They can easily find those threats, but not so much for beginners. They need much more like specific themes, at least, to my mind, to discuss. But also, there's one more question because you said you give them a move, and then if it turns out to be a blunder, then they are sort of left alone, yeah, to find the best move in the position. And of course, stronger players maybe have an easier time to find that move, but beginners can get lost. That's why in my course, I'm usually asking them two choice tasks. I'm creating those positions that, let's say there are two different pawns to be grabbed. One pawn grab is a blunder, the other one is safe. You see? So this way I'm actually guiding them so they don't get overwhelmed because I really want to test them in that particular skill. I don't want to test them to let's say, find the great positional move in the position. That's a whole different task, basically. So that's also my new mission with this course, to make them much more guided so they don't get overwhelmed. And to me, that's why it takes time. I mean, my thought was to publish this year already, but it takes a long time. Why? Because I'm now modifying each and every position. I'm inspired by, let's say, one position I see online, but I just cannot use it directly. I have to do extra work to clarify and make it much more clean for learning outcome, basically. And that takes a long time, of course, yeah? Um,
yeah,
anyways, yeah.
how they're putting the positions together for the course was to me it wasn't particularly difficult, but it was time consuming is really what it came down to. It just took a lot of
Yeah.
time to because I would have to weed through hundreds and thousands of positions that could potentially qualify, but then you get to a point in the sequence of moves where there becomes multiple moves that are playable, and it
Right.
kind of defeats the purpose of the exercise at that point. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was time consuming to put it together, but uh, I think it was also even for my own side of improvement. I think it was very beneficial because as I was going through the course, I was having to like solve these puzzles and kind of when I was assimilating these positions, like work on them
Right.
myself to figure out the best way to play. And then
Right.
the way I did it was I also kind of like reverse engineered some of the positions so that instead of it being like a tactical puzzle, I try to figure out the defensive slant of it. And
Uh-huh.
I remember around that time when I was playing, like also that was when I published the course. It was kind of like near the end of the pandemic, kind of as things were opening up a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the tournaments I played in back then went pretty well, and I think it was a
Uh-huh.
big part due to having just like gone through tons and tons of puzzles and made that course like right before playing these
Yeah.
tournaments.
Yeah. You really improve. You also mentioned this four-step thinking process in your YouTube channel recently, Dalton. Yeah, this actually connects to what we talked about probably today. So the first step is seeing the threat. The final step is the blunder check. What are those intermediate steps again? Can you tell us?
Thinking process is pretty much looking for your own tactics at that point, looking for your
Uh-huh.
own forcing moves. There could be lots of questions you kind of intermingle in here, like, do I have any uh, three-piece lineups? Can I execute a pin, a fork, a skewer? Can I kind of go for pretty much you're just looking through your own tactics on this second step,
Mm-hmm.
uh, assuming that your opponent's most recent move doesn't do something that is, let's say, more pressing or more urgent of a concern.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you don't have any tactics of your own or any kind of particularly special forcing moves that would be good to go for, then step three is kind of just what's the plan or how am I going to improve my position? Um,
Mm-hmm.
Things like, do I have a badly placed piece? Can I make it better? Do they have a pawn weakness that I can attack? What's their plan? Maybe not threat, but what's their plan in the
Yeah.
position, and can I work around that? Those are kind of sandwiched in between the the threat question and then the blunder check question,
Hmm.
because I still think that steps 1 and 4 for the large majority of players, especially like beginner and intermediate players, those are going to be the kind of the difference makers.
Right.
But as you continue improving up the rating ladder, then those questions in the middle become,
More
uh,
important.
especially the plan question becomes more important as
Right.
you get better and better.
Yeah, so the lowest hanging fruit is question 1 and 4, right? We can agree on that, basically.
Right.
They are
Yeah.
fundamental. They must be done at every single move, each and every move, basically. So, because many people also tell me, yes, we understand when you teach us that, but when we are playing actual game, all these checklist questions just disappear, right? So that many people also tell me that, like in the heat of a battle, they forget about these steps, basically. And then do you recommend them to play slower games to internalize it, just like driving a car? At first, we have to go slowly, go through the checklist questions, and just meticulously, basically ask yourself those questions. Limit the checklist probably to 2 to 3 questions so you don't get overwhelmed. And these 2 steps, right, are fundamental, probably that we should start from those first.
Yeah, the car analogy is pretty much the exact one that I use. I pretty much say to
Yeah.
students, when you're first trying to implement, let's say this 4-step thinking process or these checklist questions, it's like driving a car. When you first learn to drive a car, you have to check the rear view mirror, you have to shift to park or drive, you have to look, left, right, you have to do so many different things. You have to hit the gas, brake, blah blah blah. And once you've been driving a car for for long enough, you don't even think about any of these things. They're just second nature at that point. But when you're first trying to practice these checklists or kind of include them into your thinking process,
Mhm.
it takes time. You have to go slow with it. Yeah, the longer the games you play, the better. I tend to recommend students playing at
Mhm.
least rapid games, if not longer. Over the board games, I think, are the most ideal because they're just the longest. Or if you can get in really long classical games without being distracted, I would say is kind of the main caveat if you're playing at home
Mhm.
uh, on the computer. But if the longer the game you're able to play, the more you're able to think through all your decisions. You're able to take it a bit slower. Um, I also do think, and I've told this to plenty of students as well, I do think you can use uh, online tactic trainers as
Yeah.
a good, let's say, kind of like arena for practicing these things as well. Especially if you don't worry
Mhm.
too much about the time aspect of things. Like, as long as you're not trying to rush to solve the puzzle, and as long as you're not focusing on the speed, you can
Mhm.
still go into a tactic trainer position. It will give you the opponent's most recent move. You can
Right.
then start off with the first question. Even though there's a puzzle there, you can still start off with the thinking process of like, why did they play that move? What are
Mhm.
they trying to do? Then you look for your own, you solve the puzzle pretty much. But even before you end the puzzle, you still do the blunder check part of things. You're not going to incorporate the planning aspect in the
Yeah.
tactic trainer for the most part, but you're still going to get practice with kind of the first, second, and third steps.
Right.
Uh, Even
Right.
if you
Right.
do know that there's an answer to the position, it's
Mm.
obviously different than a game, but you can at least kind of practice those couple of steps
Mm.
when you're doing it in a tactic situation as well. You can do that with really any position you come across. It doesn't have to be a tactic. It could be a position you just find in a book,
Right.
position it shows you, something you found on Reddit, Chessable, whatever it might be. You can always kind of use those 3 steps at the very least to kind of guide your thinking process. If especially if there's already a thread or a tactic in the position that you do need to imminently find or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree that I even made a video about this, like 2 crucial steps that will elevate your game. And they are those 2 steps, like seeing the threat and blunder check. I mean, that's the lowest hanging fruit. That's what mostly decides the games. And if you fix that, that will give you the highest benefit for your work. So absolutely clear. I mean, you're also working on the fundamentals of chess. So we agree on that. That's actually a very good sign. And then maybe we can slowly move on, unless you need to add something about the blunder check process per se. Maybe we can then move on to this blueprint idea. And chess being mostly a game of pattern recognition, they're good to work on some blueprints. In our openings as well, you made one course about Benko, Gambit, blueprint, I believe. Yeah, that also connects to those typical chunks in the middle game and so on. You are now working on a course on converting an advantage in chess and how to follow certain blueprints. Can you tell us a bit about that? What the idea is behind this course, and what exactly you mean by the blueprint per se?
Yeah, so the title of the course is set to be Seal the Deal, How to Gain and Convert Middle Game Advantages.
Okay.
So it's mainly revolving around situations in the middle game where this is kind of, let's say, more so the third step at this point of this four-step thinking process that I talk about.
Yeah.
You're not thrown into positions where there's like a threat from the opponent, or you're not really. You should still do a blunder check, and you should still use these steps. But for the most part, you're being put into positions where you have to come up with some kind of way of growing your advantage or gaining an advantage in the first place. Uh, and a lot of this, in my opinion, starts off with an evaluation or assessment of the position to begin with.
Hmm.
So, again, if you're put into a position, and let's again assume that there's no tactics going on and you just have to find some kind of improvement, I tend to focus on four, I guess like I could call them like evaluation factors is maybe a way of wording it. What I focus on in the course is like king safety, material, piece activity, and then I kind of just label as like the pawns, like pawn structure,
Yeah.
pawn weaknesses, pawn play, whatever would involve the pawns in a kind of situation like that. I go a little more in depth in the chapters individually, but in the course, those the types of advantages that I outlay are number one is a king safety advantage. If your opponent's king is kind of exposed or uncastled, then you want to try to see if you can take advantage of that in the position somehow.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is a material advantage. If you're ahead material, there's certain blueprints or ways you should try to play. This is probably the one that's most familiar to people. If you're ahead a piece, try to trade pieces and simplify. Right. If you're if you're ahead a piece, another thing you could also try to do is try to use your extra firepower to attack the opponent because you have the material superiority.
Yeah.
A third advantage that I focus on in the course is the bishop pair. So if you have the pair of bishops and your opponent doesn't, there's certain ways you should try to play the position. The general gist of this is like trade pawns, open the position up, try to use your bishop's kind of higher mobility or higher range of firepower to play the position in some way. The fourth advantage is a space advantage. So if you have more space than your opponent, you control more of the board. The way that I define that is mostly with pawns. If I have pawns that are a little further up the board compared to my opponent, or if I have more pawns on the fourth rank compared to pawns they have on the fifth rank, I'll have a bit of a space advantage in some area of the board. It might depend on where the pawns are. But if you have a space advantage, there are certain things you should try to do in the position, certain things you should try to avoid. Like one general thing is if you have more space, you want to try to keep pieces on the board. If you're behind on space, you should try to trade pieces. So if you have the space, you should avoid certain exchanges unless they're really beneficial.
Right.
And then the fifth advantage is pawn weaknesses. So if your opponent has an isolated pawn, doubled pawns, backward pawn, they have like maybe a hard to use pawn majority or something like that, then there's certain things you should try to do, or certain, again, like blueprints you should try to follow in those kind of situations.
Mm-hmm.
And then aside from those chapters, there is like a big test chapter on how to gain advantages, and then a second test chapter on how to convert advantages.
Wow.
I try to, again, it's not only having the advantage in the first place, but there's certain positions and examples on like how to gain the bishop pair, and then once you have the bishop pair, what do you do with it at that point? Or how to weaken your opponent's pawn structure. Once it's messed up, then here's the blueprint or plan you should follow after that. And so it's kind of flowing through, like once you're getting this advantage, then how do you make use of it in the position? Because I feel like a lot of students I've had over the years, they'll get an advantage, and whether it's because they did something themselves or their opponent just kind of gives them the advantage sometimes in the game, but then they don't really
know how to convert
this advantage very well. In certain circumstances, they might have the bishop pair, but then they don't really know what to do with it, or they know that they should trade pawns, but that's about the extent of it, or they know that the opponent has a weak pawn. They know if I ask them like, what do you do against a weak pawn? They say I should attack it, but then like they don't start attacking the pawn in the game or something like that. So that's what the course is all about, is trying to kind of point people in the right direction, or give you kind of, again, these kind of blueprints of, okay, I have this certain advantage, I should try to do this certain thing,
Right.
and kind of help you in that way.
Yeah. So then comes the big question to my mind. How do you make sure, because in Chessable there's move trainer, right? So usually, I mean, at least to my strategy courses, I have to stop after move 3 or 4, because then, the operation is complete, and the rest of the game, well, there are different ways to play, and I get, there's not like a clear only one solution, and I cannot expect people to, let's say, guess 10 moves in a row. So I have to stop and show them the rest of the game manually. They just click through. So how do you then use that in this course? Like, because if they are supposed to train how to convert an advantage, I assume we are talking about maybe 10 moves or even more moves, yeah, down the line, that they will be tested on the move trainer. How did you solve that problem?
Yeah, so the way that I did it, and this was a big discussion point among myself and then the Chessable publishing, people at the same time when we were trying to figure out the format of the course, you could say, because you're absolutely correct. If I have a position where you get the bishop pair, and then you now have the bishop pair, you would like to see the rest of the game and figure,
Right.
have an idea of like what are you supposed to do in that position as the game progresses on. So, uh, in the, let's say, core chapters, not the test chapters, in the core chapters, it's a lot of like big chunks of games, and I'm using like the trainable side of things versus the
Mhm.
puzzle side of things. So I'll give them, I'll have a certain game, we'll pick up on move, 10 or of the game or something like that, and then maybe the next 3 or 4 moves from that particular position illustrate one certain concept of using, let's say, a space advantage, and then I'll
Mhm.
fast forward maybe a few moves later, and then in the next trainable, it'll kind of cover a different aspect of that same exact game, but
Mhm.
still incorporating, okay, maybe example number 1, you train out a couple of moves that focus on getting the space advantage. Example number 2, within the same game, you train out a couple of moves of like reinforcing the pawn space advantage that you do have. Example 3, within the same game, is again maybe a few moves later, and now your goal is to uh, start mobilizing your pieces to go attack the opponent's king because you have better piece mobility due to your space advantage.
Mhm.
And then maybe example 4, again from the same game, again a few moves later, is now you're going forward with the attack at that point. Um, and then I do. Um, I'm not exactly sure how it'll be when the course comes out. My original idea was to have a final informational after the end of the game to show like the full game in one informational that you could just click all the way through. It may end up being the case that the remainder of the game gets put into a reference chapter,
Mhm.
which is still going to be available for the students to go click through and see how the game actually finished out.
Yeah.
But you're correct that like from the move trainer side of things, if you're trying to train a variation and there's, you know 4 different moves that are good to play, then
Yeah.
students become maybe a little bit frustrated because
Yes.
if they're especially if they're having to like solve the position and there's multiple moves, then it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah.
Um, but most of the core chapters were mostly trainables, and then I did have maybe a handful of puzzles at the end of each of the core chapters. And then inside of the 2 big test chapters, there was 75 puzzles in each of those.
Mhm.
And those were all, there's one best way to play in the position. You have to gain whatever the advantage is that you think you should go for in that position.
Mhm.
Um, and then the puzzle will end once you have either gained or grown that advantage, and then you can still see the rest of the game in the
Right.
reference chapter. That's kind of the workaround that we were going for. But that was definitely
Mhm.
a point of discussion because it was a little. I wanted to show how the game's finished, but you can't really
Mhm.
train the entire
Yeah.
40 move game.
You cannot.
Uh,
Yeah.
no, nobody wants. I don't want to do that. Nobody wants to do that. It's a bit too much. But having it at least available to go through in like an informational or in the reference chapter was kind of the workaround that we decided on. It's not
Right.
perfect because not every student is going to go do that, right? Some people
Yeah.
are going to just focus on the trainable and the puzzles and not actually go look at the rest of the game, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it's there for the people who want to, you know, go see what actually happened later on in the game. Once you're
Mhm.
once you're already up, 2 pawns, you have lots of ways to play in a position, so you can go see how Magnus Carlsen won the game pretty much if you want to see the rest of it.
Yeah. I mean, what I normally do is that I just give them those positions and just ask them to play against a training partner, sometimes a bot, sometimes to me in a simultaneous exhibition, right? Because you need this experiential also training when it comes
Yeah.
to converting those positions. At least that was my solution across years because there's not a course that was available that actually tackles these things, yeah, for the entire game. And as you said, there are multiple solutions oftentimes. But it's very important that they get the experience of playing those training game positions to convert an advantage, basically. That's crucial. Okay, so at least your course will tackle that somehow. And maybe you can even show us some positions to make it more concrete. So Dalton is showing us positions, guys, from his upcoming course. It's like a sneak peek to his course. He will show us some positions on the space advantage chapter, and he will guide us through the positions, actually. So the floor is yours, my friend. You can start.
So I'll first say most of the positions in games from the course tend to focus on games where a higher rated player was outplaying a lower rated player. That was kind of the angle of things I went for.
Right.
You'll see lots of like Magnus Carlsen. You'll see lots of other players who are very strong positionally. But for the most part, I tended to use games where they were playing against somebody. Let's not like a beginner player opponent or something, but somebody that was probably about 300 points lower rated or so. And I tended to focus on positions in games like that because it kind of shows a like a story to the game, rather than the opponent putting up maybe the absolute most stiffest resistance. You kind of got to see you get to see a bit more of a way that the stronger player again takes an advantage that they gain, and then they do convert that advantage.
Yeah, that's the whole mentality of my instructive chess classics series, by the way, on YouTube. It's always higher rated player outplaying a lower one because those games are cleaner usually, as you mentioned. You see a plan unfolding. Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, and I think it's just like you said with the classical games. I think that's one of the biggest reasons, in my opinion, that looking at like Morphe, Capablanca, Alekhine, like looking at their games are really good for learning obviously lots of different things, but they tended to be much better than the opponents that they played against in most situations. So they
Yeah,
had this kind of more flowing way of winning the games for the most part. But
right.
okay, so this was a game played. I believe white here, Venkatesh, is a international master, and black is just a tad under the rating of 2000. So again, it is a bit of a mismatch. But this is
Yeah.
the first position that, at least from this game in the course, the question here is black has just captured a knight on e5. We have to recapture in this position somehow. We can take with the rook, or we can take with the pawn. And this is kind of the first question that's posed from this game. Should we take with the pawn? Should we take with the rook?
Right. I
It
like
is,
the two-choice test. I like such two-choice tasks for positional reasons. Beautiful way to start. Yeah. Yes.
yeah. So the best move here is to take with the pawn. You do want
Mm-hmm.
to recapture this way. Not only are you attacking the knight that's on f6, of course, but you are also kind of moving your pawn further into the opponent's half of the board. So
Yeah.
you're gaining more space because of that. The way that I tend to think of space, as I said a bit earlier, is a lot of the times who controls more of the fourth and fifth ranks.
Mm.
Even though technically right now it's kind of 1 versus 1, our pawn has moved into black's half of the board. So it tends to kind of become a bit more useful. I kind of say it's almost like 1.5 versus 1 at this point.
Yeah.
So as the game continues, the knight moves away, and then the follow up question is, how do you reinforce the pawn, or what do you do about the threat that black has on the e5 pawn, because you obviously don't want to lose it here. So there's a couple of ways you can defend it or react to this. You could play f4, knight f3. You
Mm-hmm.
could try to play e6. This is more on the risky side of things, but it is a
Yeah.
move people might consider.
Yeah.
The best move in the position is to play knight to f3. Not only are you defending the pawn, but you're also opening up the bishop that's on the c1 square.
Mm-hmm.
Pawn to f4 is not a bad move, but I did give it kind of the slightly dubious mark. Black can now play knight to c5 and then pawn to d4.
Yeah.
And black starts to create some counterplay, which is quite annoying. So knight f3 is the better option. And then the game, like, this is where, let's say, the first trainable of this game pauses off.
Yeah.
We pick up on the second one, which I'll close out there. This is a couple moves later in the game. White retreated the bishop to c2 and then played bishop f4. Black played the move pawn to b5 and e6. And so then you pick up at this point, and now the question is, okay, you have that space advantage, especially this e5 pawn that is kind of in black's half of the board a little bit. Especially, let's say, on the king side half of the board is where you have your space advantage. And then what are you going to do with your space advantage? And the best move, which is the move played in the game, is the move pawn to h4.
Right.
And now you start, now that you've secured your pawn in the center of the board and gained that space advantage, one of the key steps in this kind of blueprint, you could say, is to start mobilizing in the kingside direction to go for an attack. The white wants to play h5, maybe
like
take
alpha zero.
It is a bit of an alpha zero approach. Queen to d2, bishop to h6. These are all things that happen as the game progresses. But white has a pretty good position here, because what's really going to end up happening due to the space disadvantage for black, especially on the king side, is that these queenside pieces are going to have a little bit of a harder time protecting the king as the game goes on. And that's kind of how things work out in the game. So h4 is the first move of this like second trainable variation. Black plays bishop to b7, white plays h5, rook to c8, queen to d2, and then this
are they all trainable, by the way? All these moves, queen d2 and so on.
All of these moves are trainable. Yeah. These aren't solving positions just yet. These aren't puzzles just yet.
Okay. So people don't get frustrated if they see some other move here instead.
Yeah, right. So there are a couple of, pretty much in the course, whenever there were situations with a couple of moves that were good, I didn't use those as puzzles, because
good idea.
I didn't want people to feel like, oh, I came up with another move that also works, but it's not the right answer. So that's always kind of annoying. I'm actually, a little bit of a side story, I'm actually working through the Woodpecker Method myself right now. I'm doing it on stream, and I've been doing it for the past 3 weeks. There's a fair amount of positions in the Woodpecker Method where there's like multiple moves that are good and work. So I've also found that can be quite annoying even for myself if I'm in a position where I found the second best move, which is maybe like 0.2 worse than the first best move, but they're wanting me to find the first best move. But yeah, in any position in this course where there was multiple moves that were good, I would make it like a trainable rather than a puzzle type situation. But all the puzzles
by the way, for terminology, isn't it called clickable? Because there's clickables, there's also trainables on Chessable, right? So you make it clickable, so they click through the moves basically this way. They don't need to guess the moves themselves. Or trainable. What does trainable mean in this sense?
These would still be trainable. Trainable meaning that when you click into the variation, it will show, let's say just this position right here. It'll start off with this position. There will be a little text explanation blurb, and then instead of you moving the piece on the board yourself just yet, there will be like a next button. You click on next, and it'll show white's move.
Right. Okay.
And
so you see,
there are some clickables within the variations, but in terms of, let's say, like the main line of these positions that we're looking at right now, they're going to be these trainable variations where you're not solving them, but you're kind of given the answer, but it's more so about the explanation behind the moves that is the most important thing here, rather than you trying to find the only move in the position, because there's not one, like h4 is not the only good move here. I'll just say
no
in this kind of position. It's probably the best plan, but you could play queen to d2 first. You could play a number of different moves first if you were actually playing the game, I guess.
Yes, that's exactly why I thought this was a difficult course to fetch, because there are multiple solutions, there are multiple ways, move orders, and so on. Like, how do you? It's hard, but also rewarding, of course.
That's the way I tried to put it together. Was any position where there was multiple moves that were good, I made it more on the trainable clickable side of things.
Yeah.
Whereas if I had positions where there was like one best move that you should play from a strategic standpoint, then those would be more on the puzzle side of
Yes.
things.
Makes sense.
But yeah, so this example plays out that, white improves the queen a little bit, pushes the h-pawn. Pretty much white is trying to mobilize towards a kingside attack. Of course, there's a lot of text explanation. We're not showing this because then it will give the moves away, but
Yeah.
there's a bunch of explanation on all of this.
Yeah.
Now, this next position I think is a really important one because black has just played the move queen to c7, and if you're only focused on what you want to do in these positions, then you're going to miss what black is going for here.
Right. So queen c7 aligns the queen and rook on the c file. So maybe they want to go b4 or something on the next one. I mean, I'm not sure what their intention is, but they also eye the pawn on e5 if it makes any difference. But it's already protected 3 times. So what does queen c7 plan? What's their plan with this move actually? That's always a good question.
So it is to play b4.
Yeah.
Maybe even
d4. Yeah.
Depending on
to
the
activate the
situation.
bishop.
But the key idea is that black is aligning towards the bishop, and so now our c3 pawn is pinned. If we just focus purely on what we want to do on the king side, I don't know, you take on g6. Maybe taking g6 is fine because black should react. But essentially, if you don't do something about this b4 idea, then you can get yourself into trouble. Like in the game later on, white plays a move like knight to h2 to go to g4.
Right.
If white tries to play knight h2 here, black can play. They might be able to take the pawn. It's a little risky due to some pin ideas, but at the very least, they could try pawn to b4, which is allowing kind of unnecessary counterplay.
Sure.
There's no reason to really let black get some mess going on the queen side. So the move that was played in the game, which again is not the only good move, but it does address this idea. White did play the move. I'll just do it that way. There we go. Rook to c1.
Rook c1.
He's just defending the bishop. It's nothing super fancy, but he is taking away the sting of this b4 or d4 idea. And so a big focus of the course as well is not only the blueprints of how to convert these positions, but it's also this the importance of it. All of the advantages that are shown in the course are more on the, let's say, long-term advantage side of things. When you have a material advantage, that's a long-term advantage. Bishop pair is a long-term advantage. Space advantage is long-term, generally speaking. When you have these long-term advantages, you don't really want to
give needless counterplay.
Yeah, you don't want to give needless counterplay. You don't want to feel the need to rush, is what it comes down to. Because these advantages aren't going to disappear as long as you do a good job of holding on to them.
Right.
So rook to c1 is more of a prophylactic move. You're preventing black from playing b4. So as the game progressed, black played bishop a8, which doesn't really do a ton. White moved the bishop off the c file just in case, and then starts to mobilize over on the king side direction. It's risky to take this pawn due to just different pin issues that black is going to run into.
Right.
In the game, black played queen c4. White kicked the queen backwards, and pretty much right around here is where this particular trainable cuts off, because now we're kind of in the next phase of the game. White's playing bishop h6 to kind of start the attack on the king side.
Move the defender.
The final trainable is a little longer. It does go through the end of the game, but again, it's not you having to solve all these moves. It's you being able to kind of mainly just to see the rest of the game. So white won the game pretty quickly from here. They took on g7, checked on h6, took on g6 a couple times.
Bishop c6, yes.
Bishop to last open the king. And it's pretty, I think it's pretty vivid how the space advantage that white has is kind of cutting off black's pieces on the queen side. They're having a hard time getting over to the king side to protect the king. And white went through an attack pretty quickly. Checks with the queen, starts to bring the rook in.
Yeah, the rook left on the third rank. Yeah.
Checks to keep the king from running away to the d8 square. And the rest of the game, there's multiple ways to win, but essentially white goes through it this way. wins the knight, and eventually white delivers, checkmate around the corner here.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this was one
Nice.
of my favorite games from the course. There's lots of other ones that are good as well for people who are going to check it out. But for the most part in the course, I tried to show lots of examples of, again, like one player gaining an advantage at some point. In this case, it was a space advantage, and then how does he use that to win? This game, it was, he gained the space advantage by taking with the pawn on e5. Then the next step was to reinforce the pawn in the center with knight f3 and bishop f4. Then the next step after that is to start aiming over in the kingside direction, which was like the h4, h5 plan. Then there was this moment of prophylaxis where the opponent is creating some counterplay, and we don't want to let them get too messy with that. So rook to c1 and bishop to b1. And then finally, once black is kind of out of counterplay, then we go right back to playing for the attack on the king side. And white won a very nice game in this case.
Yeah. You mentioned you always give long-term advantages, but then there are also some dynamic and short-term advantages in chess. They are like time-dependent, right? Like the opponent's king is stuck in the center. You have to play dynamically, actively, sacrifice. Do you also give such advantages in this course? And how to play with those?
In this particular course, I focused on the long-term strategic static advantages. I may make a follow-up course that focuses on more dynamic advantages in the future, but this particular one was more on the long-term side of things, because you're absolutely correct. There are, time advantages, a king not being castled. Maybe you have, a certain type of advantage that isn't going to be there for very long. You have the initiative, you have elite development. These are definitely types of advantages that you want to know how to convert when you do have them, but they're much different in nature compared to the advantages I focused on in this course, because the ones in this course are more about kind of slow, methodic play versus, okay, I'm the opponent's king isn't castled, I need to like checkmate them or get some big attack right on the spot. I might have a follow-up course in the future on more dynamic advantages, but this one focuses just solely on the long-term advantages in this one.
Dalton, this course will be covered by Sam Shankland, right? Grandmaster Sam Shankland will cover the entire video for this course. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's I'm the one that made the course, and then Sam Shankland is Grandmaster Sam Shankland is the one who is doing the videos for the course.
That's amazing.
Also, interestingly enough, the way that he did it for the videos is, let's say for the main core chapters, he does kind of reiterate, and he obviously goes through like the text of what I say, but he also adds his own thoughts on everything, and I think even as I watch the videos, he even says like, "Oh, Dalton didn't say this. I might also include this in here."
Cool. Filling the gaps.
He's got a grandmaster's perspective, so he's going to have a little bit more in-depth thoughts on some of the positions. But for the two final test chapters that have like 75 puzzles in each one, the way he decided to do the test chapters is he actually solves them like live in the moment.
Wow.
Rather than him already knowing the answers, he solves them on Chessable through the move trainer, and gives his like live thoughts on how he would work through the position or how he would think through it.
That's amazing.
Then he sees whatever the answer is that's presented. He's correct in the large majority of cases, but there are some that he gets wrong, which is
that's a good sign.
That's a good sign. He doesn't just blaze through all of them in like 2 seconds each or something like that.
Right. That's incredible to hear a very strong player, world-class player, to think through the positions. Also from a learning perspective. I mean, the best way to learn is to listen to a stronger player, laying down the thought process.
I watched the videos that he did, and I was learning from what he was saying at the same time when he would add in extra tidbits to stuff that I didn't have in the text or anything.
Yeah. And you even got some lessons from Sam, right? Some years ago, basically. You were a student to begin with, basically. That's how we know each other.
Yeah. That's how we first got in contact. I was, I think it was it's like 2020, 2021, around that range. We started working together a bit. And then when I lived in St. Louis for a couple of months, we would meet up and have a meal together and hang out and stuff like that. But that's how we first kind of got in contact.
Yeah. He was impressed by your work ethic, and then he started endorsing all your courses and doing this video coverage as well. Yeah, that's a great collaboration, I would say, to work with Sam, and I'm sure the quality will increase Is it going to publish next year, by the way? Is it a set date? Is it coming?
It's set for December 27th, so like right after
Wow,
Christmas.
Christmas, right after Christmas. Nice.
Right.
Good time to publish stuff. Yeah, that's good New Year's resolution for you guys as well. If you want to convert your advantages, you know which course to go for. Yeah, I'm very curious myself as well. I will definitely check it out myself as a coach. At least I will have now one resource to tell my students to fill this gap. And I'm sure many people will be interested as well. You told me that you're also working on the Woodpecker method, right? Woodpecker method. Well, there's no scientific evidence on it yet. We are basically based on anecdotal evidence that it somehow works for people. Just yesterday, one of my old students contacted me, by the way, and he told me he's around 1900 ELO, by the way. He contacted me, he got amazing results after he used the Woodpecker method, but he mixed the puzzles. He got Woodpecker tactics, Woodpecker positional, some of my courses, some of other stuff as well. That he maybe like 1000 something puzzles in total in the set, and he did the entire cycle basically, or maybe fifth cycle or something, maybe not 7 but 5 cycles, and he got amazing results after that basically. He strongly believes it works, but it should be a mix. He told me that he doesn't know whether it's a tactical solution, positional puzzle. But you started recently about this, and you're not finished yet, Dalton, right? You're curious about the results.
Yeah. So I started doing. I had always, like you said, I'd heard anecdotal evidence. There's lots of discussion as to whether it's best to use the Woodpecker Method book itself, or to use different books to do this, maybe do the same method, or if the method's even useful in the first place because you're just solving the same puzzles, and maybe you should try solving different puzzles. So there's a lot of discussion, and like you said, maybe not a whole lot of scientific evidence, but anecdotally, people have had good results, is what I've heard. And so I decided to just start doing the Woodpecker Method book myself back on October 28th, so like 2.5 weeks ago. And I will be finishing the first cycle on Friday this week. I've been live streaming it on YouTube the entire time. And once I finish cycle number 1, then I'm going to do some testing of stuff. I'm going to go play blitz games, do puzzle rush, like anything that's pattern recognition based. I'll try to see how I do. If I can get personal record scores or whatever it might be, and then I'll go to cycle 2, cycle 3. I'm going to try to get it down to do them all in one day situation, just because I don't know. I think it would be kind of, I don't know if fun's the right word, but it would be it should be challenging. Let's say that for sure.
Yes. Yeah, that's hard.
But my plan is, once I finish Woodpecker Method 1, then I'll do Woodpecker Method 2, which is the positional puzzles.
Right.
Now you just said your students kind of like mixing it all together. I don't think I've heard of anybody doing it that way. That could be very interesting, because like you just said, you don't know if it's a tactic or if it's a positional situation. So that sounds like it could be a very good way of incorporating the same
I think so.
method, but you don't know if it's a tactic or if it's a positional puzzle.
Just like a real game, right? Just like in a real game. We are simulating a real game environment that way. I always believe that's a very strong way to train your chess. But yeah, there are also counter arguments, obviously, but that was the entire idea of my fundamental chess calculation course. It's a mix of positional tactical, but in a shortest possible medium, so you don't get overwhelmed, basically. So that was the whole idea behind the course. At least we have, N number 1 evidence from my student that actually really worked for him. The problem with all of this is, by the way, is a survivorship bias, that since we are hearing from successful people, we never hear from unsuccessful people. Like, we have no idea how many people try the Woodpecker without any results. Yeah, so that part is missing from the reporting, so to speak. But since it's working for some people, even for Hans Tikkanen, who became a grandmaster after doing the cycles, there's definitely food for thought when it comes to this. Like, it needs to be more scientific studies on this, actually, that compare different methods.
A little bit of anecdotal evidence for myself. It's maybe not the most applicable in the world, but like I said, I started doing this about 2.5 weeks ago, and then within 10 days of starting, I went from like a 25-20 blitz rating on chess.com to like 2,700
cool.
within like 10 days. Now I am back down a little bit. This is all in my anonymous account, but it's blitz also, so it could very well just be a big, it could just be a coincidence at the end of the day. But
that's a big jump still. I mean, 200 rating, 200 is a big jump, right? In any case,
right? Yeah, I was pretty. It was like around the time I was doing this, so I mean, I I don't know if it's directly correlated or if it's just part of what could have happened anyways, but I mean, I don't see
Yeah.
why that wouldn't have helped at least somewhat.
By the way, Dalton, guys, has also a blog, Substack, called Chess Chatter. You can also follow his post there. He writes about Woodpecker Method, he writes about different parts of chess. He's a very thoughtful author as well. You can learn a lot. He has a YouTube channel with the same name, FM Dalton Perrine as well. You can go and check. I will post the links on this video description as well, so you will find them. And yeah, otherwise check his courses, 5, soon to be 6, on Chessable, and follow him as well. Dalton, have a great day. Thank you so much for joining me again in today's show. And I will catch you again very soon, my friend. My best wishes to you. Yeah, thank you so much.